Alright, so moving on to the second part, because the first part was way too long, is the diffuser. So I have a just a standard diffuser thing unit here, is what a normal people would normally get. You know, these work, you know, pretty decently. They stick onto the wall, and this little disc here basically diffuses the bubbles into smaller bubbles, so that those smaller bubbles can quickly dissipate into your water column, because that's what you want. Ideally, you want the bubbles coming out from the CO2 as small as possible, so it really just foams and really just diffuses into the water. And that's the whole point of a diffuser. So there's a couple of diffusers that you can get. This is the standard. A lot of people go this, and these work. But I'll give you some pros and cons about these versus the others. All right. So similar to the other diffuser, this is an inline diffuser. It works a lot better because there's more time that the bubbles are diffusing in the tank. So it's the same concept. There's a disc in here, but basically you hook these up into your filter, and it helps diffuse through your filter. So there's longer time travel, and basically the CO2 can get into the water column a lot faster. And lastly, the other way is just using a reactor. So similar to an inline, but it's actually like a completely separate unit. Like, think of like a canister filter, and you're pumping CO2 in there, and it's mixing in there, and then it pumps back into your tank. So similar to this, but the reactor basically should diffuse 100% before it actually dumps into your water column. So with this, it works. It's cheap. You know, if you have a small tank and you don't mind, you know, losing CO2, because what happens with this is you'll be kind of wasting a little bit more CO2 versus the other ones. You don't really mind. There's a couple of good ways to prevent that, and what you can do is put it under a kind of like a wave maker or a flower, and it will help push the water or the CO2 that way, so it actually lasts longer in the water. Another way is to put this right under the inlet tube of your filter, and it'll help. The bubbles will basically travel into your filter, and they'll go through there and then back right out, and that's kind of like an inline. The only drawback of that is it can make small bubble noises into your filter, which some people mind, some people don't mind. So definitely, you know, these are cheap. You can start with these. They don't hurt anything. But I would recommend getting one of the inlines so that you can maximize your CO2, save some CO2, and it probably will last longer in terms of your refills. Alright guys, the next one up is the CO2 tank. Pretty easy. I recommend just getting a 5 pound and up. 5 pounds for anything small, even 55 and lower. Anything above that, you can get a 10 pound. You know, obviously a bigger tank. If you get a 15 pound, awesome. You know, 10 pound tank is pretty good too, and it will last you a while. But the one thing I want to say about this is just try to avoid the paintball ones. They're small. You have to buy adapters, because a lot of these regulators are designed for the bigger cylinders, and it's just a waste of time. Those little ones will last you, you know, even if you had a nano, it'll last you a while, but still, if you got a 5 pound, it'll last you a year or more, right? So just get a big one, and just save you the hassle, save you the time. Alright, so another key thing to consider is drop checker. I know that I did not get one when I first started, so I was kind of going off of what a lot of people say, bubbles per second. And really the bubbles per second, it varies from tank to tank. So really, get one of these. What you do with this is you basically put it this one is only a single, so you put in your indicator into here. It'll be blue. So basically there's a blue, green, and yellow is the standard color. Blue means there's not enough CO2. Green means you're in the perfect zone of CO2 for the tank levels. And then yellow is you're pumping way too much CO2. So what happens is when you start this should be blue when there's no CO2 or your CO2 isn't on. And what happens is when you start pumping CO2, this one will slowly change from a blue to a green. When it hits like a kind of a, I guess this kind of green here, you're good. When it gets to like this yellow, you're bad. or any shade between here could be bad, good. It really doesn't matter. The way I tell is if the fish or your livestock is like gasping, then you're pumping too much CO2 in there. Maybe back it off a little bit. And then also just looking at your plants, right? If your plants are pearling really nicely, then you're doing pretty good. So these are a must because you can't just go off of like bubbles per second nowadays. It's just like my 1/25, it counts way too fast. I can't even count the bubbles out of that. So the next one that it's an option. You don't really need it, but I'm a visual person, so I kind of need to know how many bubbles per second or whatever my regulator is throwing out to make sure it's accurate. So if you get one of these, it's you can get a bunch of them. There's a bunch of them, but it will show you how much bubbles you're pumping in, CO2 that you're actually pumping into your tank. You can count them. You can see the size of them. Adjust it, whatever, right? Not needed, but I highly recommend getting one just so that you can test your equipment to make sure you're pumping that much. You're pumping like too little, too small, because sometimes you don't know. Maybe the regulator like super fails or like whatever, and it just dumps a bunch of them, and you'll see this thing like explode in terms of like just air. So this is a good indicator for failures because you can quickly glance to see, okay, it's pumping the same amount of bubbles as yesterday, or oh crap, it's pumping too small, pumping too little, because visual indicators can quickly tell you, oh, you're low in CO2, oh, you need to refill it or whatever, stuff like that. So I think you should get one of these. These are fairly cheap. You can get anything anywhere. Sometimes, most of the times if you buy a regulator, it comes with it. Sometimes it doesn't, and you can just get one by itself. All right, and the final item that you'll need for your setup, and it's really important, is a timer, and really you need two of them, or some version where you can set your regulator to a certain time, and then your light to have a certain time. The reason why is because you want your CO2 to come on maybe 30 minutes ahead of your light to kind of like prep your tank, kind of really just massaging the plants. A good example of this is like, take your car for example. If you did a cold start in your car and then you basically smash the accelerator and then you expect the car to go super fast, it won't. There's going to be a lag, a delay, because the car isn't warmed up. So it's the same way with your tank, your planted tank with CO2. You want to pump the CO2 into your tank 30 minutes ahead, so the tank will really already have CO2 all in the water column, ready for the plants to use once the lights come on. If you haven't noticed, plants, they kind of close at night, and when they have light, they open back up, and basically their leaves are kind of like, pointed towards the sun, so they can absorb that for energy and create that into like a food source. So really what you're doing is when you're pumping CO2 30 minutes ahead, you're massaging your plants, massaging really the water column with a bunch of CO2, and when the lights come on, the plants are open and they're basically using the light and then using also the CO2 to basically grow, and then also use that as food. If you have the CO2 come on at the same time as the light, basically there's going to be a lack of CO2, and really they're going to be trying to compete with each other, and it's just a slower process for them initially. And then the other key thing is you want your CO2 to turn off 30 minutes ahead, approximately before the lights go off. It's the same thing with the CO2 turning off 30 minutes ahead of the lights. Same concept there, right? You have still CO2 in the water columns. You want that kind of gone before the lights come off, and then with the lights being on 30 minutes ahead, the plants and lights will take care of that. All right, and the last one is pretty basic, but the thing is, I didn't know this when I started, right? So you have normal airline, and then you got CO2 tubing. So what's the difference? If you actually touch this and this, the CO2 tubing is a lot harder and is a lot thicker. In terms of thickness is the same, but it's a lot harder versus your airline tubing. So you want to get CO2 tubing because CO2 can, I guess, dissipate into the air or through this tubing, this thin wall tubing, and you can really lose CO2 through this. Now, you're not going to lose a lot. You may lose a little bit. So really, if all you had, for the next couple of days, a week or whatever, this, and you wanted to use it, it's fine. But really, ideally, you want to use CO2 tubing. And it's the same. It's approximately the same price. It's a little bit more expensive, but it works the same way. You plug it in, you know, nothing really special, but it's just a lot thicker. Alright, so those are all the things that you want to consider purchasing, and actually it's almost a must when you are getting CO2. So, you know, when you look into pricing stuff, you know, it will add up pretty fast. So make sure you take that into account when you're looking into getting a CO2. Budget it, you know, save up for it. All these things are really critical in terms of getting a really nice CO2 unit and getting your plants and stuff set up for that. Before I let you guys go, I do have one more tip in terms of CO2. When you're first starting CO2, same thing with me. When I first started, start slow. You know, turn your knob, you know, to a very low bubble count, maybe 3 to 4, you know, small bubbles, and let it sit for 30 to an hour before you go back and check. The reason why is you want to dial this in, but a lot of people tend to say, okay, you know, here's my drop checker, it's blue, I sit there, I set it, 2 minutes later, it's not green, and I turn on the knobs. You don't want to do that because it takes time to get the CO2 diffusing into the water, and you want to have it sit for 30 minutes to an hour before you go back and adjust it. And actually, it's a lot better if you adjust it once and let it sit there all day, and then at the end of the night or at the end of the day before the CO2 comes off, check the counter and see if it actually register or hit the green, you know, color that you want. If it doesn't, the next day adjust it small and adjust from there until you can get it right. Do small adjustment and let it run for a while before you actually do another adjustment. I made the mistake before where I went in there, I was like, oh, it's not enough CO2, and then poop, you know, turn it on a lot more. Bad. So make sure you guys do that, and let me know what you guys think about the video. If you guys have any other questions about it, you know, leave it in the comments and I'll try to get to them. But peace, guys.